Whether you're someone who's trying to escape an emerging authoritarian police state or ride out the Mad Max wasteland, today's video is a warning to anyone who is attempting to go off-grid to escape the coming calamity. Here is what they don't tell you about building an apocalypse retreat. So let's get to it.
Having spent a few months out here building out this homestead, it's made me appreciate something, and I think it's something that is underrated, and that is time. Time is everything. It doesn't matter how much money you have and how much money you throw at it. Even if you were Jeff Bezos and you wanted to build an off-grid homestead retreat, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at the problem. In order to mitigate all of the risks, especially operational security, who is going to be building it? What is the build quality going to look like? You're going to have to supervise that entire process. And it comes at the cost of time and stress, but there's additional costs above and beyond the material costs. So when you go and you buy a rural property, I would encourage people to price in different things that might not appear to be valuable when you first see it, or if you're viewing it from the perspective of somebody in the city, because there's logistical challenges to building out a rural property, especially the more remote. So if you go to a remote property and you see gravel on the ground, somebody paid to have that gravel trucked all the way up that mountain. And that probably wasn't cheap. And just the amount of time that it takes to do every single thing, whether it's keeping a property well landscaped and manicured, or building certain structures. Even though the structure itself might not be that expensive, the labor that went into building it and the time that it took to build it is something that you have to price in, especially if you're somebody who thinks that day X is right around the corner. When you're looking at the price of a property, make sure that you're pricing in how long is it going to take me to build that shop? How long is it going to take me to build the roads that I need? How long is it going to take to just plant trees, to build an irrigation system, to build an orchard, to make sure that the entire perimeter fence is laid out? And then all the while, you're doing maintenance on the property. You're cutting grass. You're trying to keep the weeds down. You're fixing things that go wrong with different aspects of the property. And so when you're fully off-grid, it comes with so much responsibility. Time is the number one commodity, and it's something that is greatly undervalued when it comes to real estate pricing. So I guess what I'm saying is, a lot of times people will see a property and it'll be in a remote location and maybe the house doesn't look like much, but to build that house there, it costs a lot of money, a lot more than it would be to build it right in the heart of the city. Yet in the city, it is usually way more expensive. So there's much more incentive for builders to work in the city. I go by this principle, I don't know what I'm going to call it yet, but it's something that I came up with, and it's essentially this. It's that the properties that are most valued right now, when everything is great and the grid is up and the cities are bustling and Wall Street is revving on all engines, during those times, the properties that are the most valued are going to be the least valuable when shit hits the fan. Why? Because typically you have congregation of population density around those regions. Those are places that are fully dependent on the supply chain. Whereas a rural property, which is not commonly sought after because of course it's a long commute into the city every single day if you have to work there. But when times get bad, the actual real intrinsic value of the property, and maybe we'll call it the intrinsic property real estate value principle or something like that. The intrinsic value of that property is going to be far greater than the intrinsic property of something that is surrounded by a concrete jungle, where you can't have access to water on the land, where you can't hear the birds and the crickets chirping. As much as I'm getting really sick of these crickets lately, they serve a purpose out here. Where you can't, have access to all of the things that you need to sustain life. Right now, you don't need that because you're dependent on the just-in-time delivery system. But just like gold and fiat currency, gold has real intrinsic value. Now, this could be argued, but it has a lot more intrinsic value than fiat currency. Urban real estate is like the fiat currency of real estate. It's only inflated in value because of the man-made artifice that surrounds it. Whereas rural properties are real gold because you have access to everything that can sustain life. But it does come at that cost of time. So just because you go out and buy a property and you think to yourself, well, I saved 200 grand, you got yourself what you thought was a bargain at the time. It's not only that you're gonna have to spend maybe an additional 100 grand, it's how much is your time worth and how much are you gonna have to coordinate coming and going of different workers, different people coming out to your property. How are you going to be able to source all the materials that you need? Are you going to be able to source them locally? These are just things that you really got to consider that I never really fully appreciated. I mean, I was aware of it, but I thought it was a problem that worst case scenario, you could paper the problem over. You could figure it out. And while you can, nothing is turnkey. I'm sure there's going to be some company in the future that makes turnkey prepper solutions for multi-billionaires. Everything is built for you in advance. The orchard's already going. Everything is maintained and manicured. I'm sure there's going to be a service offered like that at some point where you just walk onto the property when the shit hits the fan and you have all the self-sustaining systems in place that have already been nurtured. And this is the other thing, is that you may have a greenhouse. You may have the plot for an orchard. You may have all of the various things you need, the mulcher, the mulch itself, the landscape fabric, things to keep nature at bay. You might have all of that stuff. If you haven't planted trees in the ground 5 years ago, or trees like this where you have to go out and buy them because, these trees are probably a few years old already. Because if you just plant an apple tree when it's young, it's gonna take years. So this is something else you have to think. It's all about time, and that's gonna cost more money. So you can spend more money to try to get around time, but it's still gonna take time is what I'm trying to say. So if you go onto a property and there's an established orchard, the value of something like that in SHTF, to have established fruit trees or established perennials, I mean, you can't even really put a price tag on that. In addition to that, building out the greenhouse, we're gonna be building out different raised garden beds and actually looking at how are we going to plant things inside the greenhouse. That takes time, okay? So all of these things, it's just there's so many moving parts. It's an entire ecosystem unto itself, and getting familiar with every aspect of that system is gonna take a lot of time. It's gonna take a lot of money. You're not gonna be able to do it yourself unless it's your full-time job. So myself personally, I do the daily updates, I do the World War III updates, plus I run the warehouse. In the same time, I'm trying to build out a homestead in record time, which is challenging to say the least. So that can be very taxing on the people who are partaking in this process. Even though I have people working for me here on the homestead, they need to be supervised. So no matter what you do, even if you hire a guy to do something, you gotta supervise a guy, you know what I'm saying? When you're looking for an off-grid property, the thing that I've discovered now is that if you can have the infrastructure there built out already, that is the parking lot, if the gravel's already poured around the house, I mean, that's a huge thing, because then you gotta think again, how much did it cost for the guy to truck all that gravel out there? How much did it cost him to build that road, to build that fence? Most people will say, okay, well, a truckload of gravel will cost me $700-800, depending on where you go. Okay, that's fine. But then what about the 10 hours of labor that you're gonna have to use to distribute that gravel to wherever you want it to go? Maybe not that much time, but I think you get my point. So there's all of these extraneous factors that you have to take into consideration that really dictate the true intrinsic value of a property. So I hope you found something of use in today's video. I would say that if you are shopping for a property, don't just look at the house itself, look at the infrastructure that's been built around it. How good is the well? How good are the roads? Is there a garden already prepared? Is there fencing already in place? Because those are the things that are really probably going to take a lot of time, and they're going to cost a lot more in terms of time, manpower, and resources than you probably think. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.